Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the 35th and best episode of the Hashcast. And as always, I have a guest way more interesting and way cooler than myself. And for the first time on the Hashcast, I have a guest taller than myself, which is freaking weird. But ladies and gentlemen, Brock Wilbur, how are you, man?
Hello. Fun. You have a much more fun room behind you. Like, I love everything that I'm seeing.
Well, we do have the same color of walls. I think that was not coordinated today, but it's my.
Yes.
I keep pointing at the wrong side because I haven't mirrored my camera yet. So I have some taekwondo trophies in the back there, some books, buttons up there, and some amiibo stuff. But when I moved to Canada, I moved to Canada from the Netherlands, and the only thing I brought was my PS3, my taekwondo trophies, and some clothes, I guess. And then my PS3 broke like 3 weeks in. It was the worst. It was the worst. So I had to buy a new one. But so Brock, I've been trying to follow your career because we are Twitter friends.
We are.
And then I tried to do my actual research because I'm a professional when it comes to this show. And I was like, wow, this dude is doing way more than I thought he did. So for people who might have missed who you are, can you give us a quick rundown of who's Brock Wilbur and what is it that you do?
Hi. So Brock Wilbur is a guy who... stand-up comedian, journalist, and does video game writing and other stuff in between. Me and my wife both started in pop culture journalism, and over the last few years, the pop culture in the United States has become the political. And from there, it got tricky and weird and hard, and we moved out to the Midwest to try and take part in politics in a place where we could make a change happen, as opposed to in Los Angeles, where things that we believe in are mostly taken care of. And out in Missouri, on the Missouri-Kansas border, there's a lot more to do. So we've been doing that, and that's me.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I took a note of you through games writing, I guess, that I saw you pop up, and all of a sudden we have like a bunch of mutual friends. But what was your your origin story? Where did you start and how did you grow? Because like you said earlier, like there's no linear path to this at all. I was curious to see how this starts, because my career has been super weird as well. But
mine is
where you started.
goddamn stupid. In like 2013, I volunteered to help a friend who was running a site called Video Game Writers, and I was just like, hey, I'm in LA, and there was a voiceover person from a game who, like, we could set up an interview, and I was like, I'd love to do that interview for you. And he was like, sure. It's a hobbyist site. No one was being paid. I did that interview, and a month or two later, the old Gamergate hit, and I wound up getting doxxed alongside all of these big games journalists. So it was like Kirk Hamilton, and then like my name, and then like whoever was running Kotaku at the time. Like it was a lot of stuff like that. And I was like, so I'm getting the phone calls in the middle of the night, like everyone else at the top of the game. I was like, I've still never been paid to write a video game article ever. And following that, I did finally get into like paid video game writing and journalism and stuff. But if you want to look at it in terms of an origin story, like before I ever did anything, I was in trouble for doing nothing, and that's a fucking nightmare place to be in. From there, I like writing places at like Paste, Unwinnable, Zam, which became Ready Set, which became Nothing, which became Fanbyte. There's a lot of cool places out there. Yeah, video games and video game journalism and the unsustainable situation that exists there. I'm a guy that I think overwhelmingly, if you want to sum me up, whether it's video game stuff or it's everything else that I cover, from cult bullshit to business to politics, what I do is overwhelmingly either events or like interviews with cool people, and I just love doing interviews with people. So what we are doing now is the sort of version of what I do. Also, here's a cool cat. Look at this cool cat.
Oh my
God, what a pretty kitty.
Wow. This is the best close-up of the cat I've had on the show, I think. That is a pretty cat, though.
They
Dear
are
Lord.
pouncing on me.
Yeah, if you're listening to the SoundCloud, I highly recommend going to the YouTube version just for this, because that was an amazing cat close-up.
When I met my wife in Los Angeles, we actually met via we were both writing at the same pop culture website, Pajiba, and for about a year, we didn't really know each other, but we read each other's stuff and sort of had like this crush on each other's like brains and what we were writing. And one night, I finally kind of drunkenly on Facebook, like messages like, hey, if you're ever in this part of Los Angeles or ever come to visit LA in general, like come do my podcast. It'd be nice. And she's like, I live half a mile away from you, actually. And it's like, oh, okay. And the next day we went out to a movie together. And then it was sort of like, oh, we are hopelessly in love. And it really helps to do a year of like getting inside somebody's brain. It was like, yeah, we've already had like a bunch of made up conversations in my head. So the fact that you're also like really cute really helps. And that was the start of our thing. But she had a cat that she'd just gotten that was a rescue from our neighborhood that was found with a bunch of boys throwing rocks at it. And so it has a little broken front paw. Yeah. And about 6 months ago here in our new city, somebody was like, we found two little tiny cats that were brothers that somebody had thrown into a dumpster. And we were like, yeah, those cats should be ours. Give us those cats. So now
people are the worst,
I'm a man with 3 cats. People are the worst. It is truly like everyone's like all day, every day. People are like, what adorable cats you have. And I was like, yeah, somebody wanted them dead. Yeah. What a weird, awful world we live in.
Yes, that is just wrong. This is wrong. It's cute, though, that you got to know your wife like that. I always like the origin story of like successful couples. I'm not sure if you know my story. Like my wife and I were pen pals when we were teenagers.
Oh my God.
Yeah. The story gets better and better because we were pen pals when we were teenagers. Then we met. She came to Holland to visit. And after, so we got together. I was like, holy shit, we were really good for each other because we never had a romantic interest while we were writing letters. It was just cool to have a friend on the other side of the world, you know? Until we met and they were like, oh shit, like we're in trouble. So I moved to Canada and eventually we bought her parents' house. So I still have all the letters that I wrote when I was 15 to her. And the address that I put on the letter is the house I live in now. Like, that is nuts.
What?
Yeah, that is pretty cool. Like, you don't think about it.
Did you murder her parents?
No, we just bought it. They wanted an apartment, and we're like, well, I live here now. Let's do it. You can make it sound creepy, so congratulations on that. Yeah, but no, her parents are fine.
I don't know how you fall into that situation. That seemed I don't have a better version of that.
Yeah. Hey man, you have cats that people threw rocks at. That's also pretty cute. But in a different way.
Yeah, sure.
So that was kind of your. That's a terrible first impression in gaming, though. Like right off the bat, you get the worst part of it.
Yeah.
And you still do it.
It's always been nice because I got to be like, I guess maybe my real intro is that I made a movie called Your Friend's Close, which Yahtzee Croshaw plays the voice of an evil AI in that. Yeah. It is a very low budget indie film. You can get it for free on Amazon if you choose to do so. It's fun and nice, and our attempt to do like a Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, but with video game stuff. And it was written from a place of absolute fandom, but also recognizing in like 2011 like what a toxic culture existed out there. And so then for a few years later to be like, hey, what got me in trouble wasn't making that or talking about that toxic world. It was just like
being there,
being around it, being in the general vicinity. And I was like, this is weird, but like it also introduced me to a lot of people that were genuine victims of that. And like it was like, oh, we're in a little club together and like we get to meet each other. And I was like, hi, I don't really belong here, but like it's nice to meet all of you, and like you're all people that like I've always looked up to, and it's interesting and cool and fun to know you. So it is weird how like antagonism can bring people together and makes things tighter and closer, and you're like, oh, I think that a lot of things in the game journalism world are better right now because without everyone being on the same page, like whenever something comes up and everyone like tears each other apart in the world, like it's like, oh, it would have been much worse previous to this. It was like watching today, or we were recording like right after the Spider-Man suit got released from the Sam Raimi film, and And at this point, like toxic like video game stuff spreads out so much that I'll ask my wife, I'm like, who's nowhere near the games world, and I'm like, hey, did you hear about the thing? And she's like, yeah, on Twitter I saw, and like everyone's gross and sucks. And it's like, yep, that's about the end of it. Like a bunch of people like screamed and they feel like they won something.
Yeah, that's like we might as well discuss it real quick, because I saw the whole fallout about the suit. That was a couple of weeks ago, and then Insomniac was almost sassy on Twitter saying like, yes, just because we hear you doesn't mean we're like listening. And then 2 weeks later they bring out the suit, which is probably was in development for a long time, but now it looks like they gave
said
in.
Today that like it was in development like before the game even launched.
Yeah,
and it's like, yeah, come on.
But they like people are terrible. If I was their PR guy, in retrospect, I would have played it slightly different. I think maybe not have said anything at all, because now it does seem like they gave in, and that gives the wrong people the wrong idea that it's worth it. And it's like a couple of times in a row now that it feels like it paid off, that they've been terrible people to developers, and they get what they want, right?
Yeah,
I tweeted today they should have given them the emo finger gun suit instead of the, like, that would have been perfect. But it sucks. But you know, the gamer culture. It's we can talk about it every time. It's I always feel a little heavy when I say like a common enemy is sometimes good, because the last time I said like, you know what we need as the world, we need a big common enemy. It was, and then I said that during Christmas dinner, and then the next day was the tsunami in India. And I was like, but I don't know if you remembered that when that happened, like it was such a huge tragedy that for a couple of days everything felt peaceful in a way.
You have a very Watchmen approach to things here.
Yes.
Like, we just need a psychic squid to all rally against. And,
It was terrible. It was terrible. But I do remember how everyone I knew was like willing to help, willing to jump in, donating, people flying there to go help. And for a moment it felt like, oh yeah, there's good in humanity. And like 2 weeks later, everything was terrible again. But yeah, I'm never wishing a common enemy upon anyone again, just in case I did that. But
that's a good call.
Yeah, just in case. I've had another time where a coworker of mine said like, I'm leaving early, and I was like, I hope you have a flat tire. And then she had like 3 nails in her tire to the point that she thought I did that. Because it is such a specific joke, right? Like, I hope you get a flat tire, and then drive out of the parking lot and actually have a flat tire. So it's either my superpower, which is the shittiest superpower ever, to wish ill upon people as a joke, or maybe I'm a psychic and don't know it yet. But we'll see. We'll see.
It might be heretical, but I believe it is Buddy Holly's bass player couldn't go on the plane with Buddy Holly the night that the music died, and said to him as a joke, like, I hope your plane crashes. Ooh. And never got over that.
No.
So
yeah, no. You be careful what you joke about, I guess. But you know all about jokes that you can and can't make, because you have done some stand-up comedy. You still do stand-up comedy?
I still do stand-up comedy. It is a more complicated world each year, and more and more I'm like, this isn't what I want to do. But I do. My stuff has never been shock value for shock value's sake or anything like that. So I'm never gonna be that white stand-up comic dude who's like, I'm oppressed and like, well, free speech.
Those guys.
It'll never come in. Overwhelmingly, I do find like I moved from Los Angeles out to the Midwest, and I found myself in more and more situations where like I'm on a show and I don't want to do the show anymore because the opening act is doing material that I think would have barely worked 15 years ago. Yeah, that sort of like women in the kitchen, like Tim Allen bullshit, and you're this is for no one, and I don't want to be associated. And if anyone in this crowd is laughing at that, I don't want to give them anything that they would laugh at me. I don't want to give them joy in their lives. So that is my weird disconnecting factor. But like, no, I'm not a part of anything that is happening in our pop culture reevaluation of what stand-up comedians can and cannot say, because overwhelmingly, when somebody is angry, like, people said I couldn't say that thing, my response is like, that your thing was not very good, or it wasn't original, or like, you know, there was a better joke out there, and if you don't see that there was a better joke, then don't do what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's very easy to do that.
I think it's such an interesting time when I see these comedians, the huge comedians that have been very successful by just being brash in general, and their material isn't working as well anymore, and they think it's the audience's fault. I think that is such an interesting thing to see that in interviews. Like, well, people are so offended all the time; they don't even laugh at my jokes anymore. Like, or maybe you should adapt to a different view on things. It's so funny how that works. But I think it's interesting that kind of ruined the whole thing for you. Like, did you not have to drive to be that new perfect comedian that really digs into how people enjoy their stuff now, or is it not up to you?
I don't know. It's interesting because I think people can see. If you are doing stand-up comedy, I think that you can recognize these things if you are somebody with any sort of awareness or self-awareness. And my wife actually caught it at a show about a year ago.
Yeah.
Where she was like, everyone that's opening here is doing a set, and their set is fine. And at the end of their set, the last thing that they do is they sort of like look left, and then they look right, and then they like say something racist, and then they run off the stage. It's like I think I can get a laugh for doing something that's edgy, but like I know that like my edgy thing isn't edgy for being clever. It's just like I'm saying a word I'm not allowed to say or something. And I was like, oh, I didn't see that like the last 8 comics in a row actually did that eye-to-eye side thing. Yeah. I was like, okay. So like if you know what you're doing is shit, then don't do shit. Yeah. It seems so simple to me.
Yeah.
But then that makes me feel like I'm much better at this than I am. I was like, oh, if I'm the only guy here who's not being awful for the sake of being awful, I'm very good at this. That's that's my standard.
That's right. Well, that's pretty good. Stand-up is always something like I wish I had it in me to actually put a show together. Like the only times I've done stand-up was like when it was a wedding that someone asked me to do like a thing, like a skit or whatever.
Right.
But to fill an hour, like how do you even, like I'm not sure if you want to talk about that, but how does it work, the creative progress of creating a show? That's something I've always been curious about.
Some people have a very hard time with it. Some people have an easier time with it. My philosophy when I first got into stand-up was like, every year I will record an hour and then I will kill every joke I wrote in that year and start fresh the next year. Because when I first got into stand-up, I wound up doing a lot of shows at like the Comedy Store in LA with people that had the same 8 minutes that they'd been doing for 12 years. And I was like, I can't watch this every night. I can't watch it even back to back. Like I was just like, why don't you have anything more than this? And I got a lot of criticism for being overly ambitious with that, and that's fine because maybe my first album is not a great album. It's fine, but like you can sort of listen to my albums and year by year be like, oh shit, he is getting better at this because I can't go back to my safety joke on anything, and that's kind of nice. And in terms of building like what an hour is, that makes it very easy because I get to talk about like. I think the worst crime for me in all of stand-up is when somebody's like, this thing that happened to me yesterday, and that's a joke that they've been telling for 7 years, and it's just like, I know that it didn't happen to you yesterday. It's such a weird lie that you're telling.
Constantly lying to us.
Like, to be able to start all my bets with like, this happened 3 months ago. That is the accurate evaluation of the time of when it happened. And like, it's not too long ago. Like, it's not 4 years ago or something weird. Like, it's like, okay, so all this is relevant material to who I am now, and that presents... It made doing these shows for me very easy because you present an idea of, like, for 2016, this is who Brock Wilbur is, and this is what he's been through, and these are where his ideas are. I leave some of them there, I take some of them with me, but then you have an understanding of a place that I'm in, and, like, that always made it very easy for me to do that thing. I don't know why some other comedians have... a harder time with it besides being like, I want to really get this down, and like I understand and get that too, but like it's just never read as interesting to me.
but like you don't do the same joke for eight years or whatever, but it is a set, right? So you go 1 week, another week, another week, another week. How doesn't it feel super weird to tell that same story like Exactly, because I've watched comedians where I've seen them twice, like at different clubs, and even the intonation of the joke is like identical, and it's a skill that you hammer it down. That how you get the biggest laugh? Like, is that a skill that you have to learn, or is it just something you already have and you just do it because you have it?
Some people have like that skill set and their intonation is just built into what they are. Other people like really have to work at that. And sometimes that intonation is what you've heard built on from years of them doing it, and like trying going up at the end of the sentence versus down. And like they've, like I do know the comedians that have that OCD quality about them, where they record every set and then go back and like break it down, and they're like, this is where the jokes were a little better tonight, or this is where it was a little worse, and then they adjust as they go. And like that sort of like science process to it is so fascinating to me, but like it's not who I am. And like for what I do, which is so much more observational, like if a minute goes by and there isn't like a laugh line, it doesn't ruin what I'm doing. For other people, it can make sense that they're like, I don't say a sentence where it doesn't end in a laugh, and if the laugh isn't big enough, I'll redo the sentence. I'm like, that's cool, and like what a dedication to the art form.
Was it your earliest in like the public eye, or the I wouldn't say the spotlight or the stage, but like you are a pretty public person with everything you do, with like writing, you put yourself out there, filmmaking, you put yourself out there. Stand-up comedy is like the rawest of them all, probably because you're actually there in a crowd. Like, what was your first skill that you decided to like to put yourself out there?
I guess probably acting. Acting has always been a good starting place, and from there, when I first moved to Los Angeles, I was doing punch up on scripts, where somebody would hire me to like, we got this movie and it shoots in a week and it's actually not very good. Would you and like maybe another couple of people sit in a room for a week and try to fix it, but you can't like change anything major because we already have the locations and everybody cast, but like it's bad. Can you like fix some lines of dialogue that make it better? And you'd be like, all right, well, how much can we fix this thing? And that instilled, that gave me a lot of the skill sets that I needed to get into stand-up. But also, like, I left that and started making indie film stuff, and I had a weird lunatic idea in my head of like, oh, I know what audiences always want in all situations. And I realized very quickly when I started into stand-up, like, I do not. Like, sometimes... whatever I think is cute and clever is not what anyone else anywhere wants to hear. I was like, okay, well, everything in my life, from journalism to writing to performance to music to making films, it all feels like it's different points, and that there's some center point that I'm always circling around, and it always makes everything better. So I get to bounce between these things, and whatever excites me at the time, I get to spend a month, a year really focusing on that, and then I bounce to something else, and whatever I learn from the interim time helps forward me in that.
Is it hard? Like, it sounds like you've done so many things, and as a creative, like it's a gig economy a little bit, going from back and forth. How do you manage? Because that is always my biggest fear in jumping into this with both legs, doing the creative stuff as a living. You've done this for a living for a while now. How do you, like, is it just doing it, just making ends meet and just living for it? Because for me, I've always had the safety net of like a corporate background job where I could fall into if it doesn't work, and I could do it in the evenings. But how brave do you have to be to just say like, fuck it, I'm just doing this as a life now?
I did about 5 years here where no day job. I have one again now, and it's in the games industry, but it is temporary. I got to be in this place because of kind of like I have that many plates spinning at the same time. So if like 4 things aren't working out, the 5th thing usually has something for me. But before that, there was a lot of absolutely corporate gig stuff. Like I worked in the dental advertising industry for 2 years, and was just like, and that's where I was when I got a launch, or like I was a paralegal at the time that I was, sneaking an hour a day writing the film script for your friend's clothes. when I should have been doing immigration law. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think the big key is just like, hustle, sneak the things in on the side, and then when you don't need to anymore, try and find a way to make it work. And sometimes just being out there adrift with no backup plan forces you to keep going or trying harder, like, because you're just like, I'm not going to admit that this didn't pan out. I'm going to go find something else, and usually that thing will happen if you have the enthusiasm behind you, or the dedication, and not be proven wrong.
Yeah, I admired it so much. Like, I still haven't. Well, I like this is my living now because I got laid off my big corporate job. Still working on this, but this is not making any money. This is just me waiting for the next big thing. But I appreciate it in people who are just willing to make that deep dive. I think, like, when I have people on my show who did it, they're all people who made it, and for everyone who has made it work, there's probably several that didn't make it work, but they don't end up on the show. So there's a little bit of like winner's bias, I guess, in the stories that I hear. But like, you do so many things so many at the same time. You say 5 plates in the air. Do you kind of set a trajectory for yourself? Like, what are your goals in any of these? Is there anything specific you're aiming for, or is it just bigger and more width to it?
It's absolutely not that version of it, because like this year has been smaller and more focused. Like, there have been years in my life that have been bigger. Like 3 years ago, I was the face of Guitar Center in all of their ads on TV, and like everyone saw me all of the time, and I was like, this is big. This is what celebrity feels like, even though I would then go to Guitar Center and couldn't get service. And I'm like, that's a cardboard cutout of my goddamn face and body. Like, please help me.
That is so fun.
It's not great. Bigger isn't the thing. And there isn't a direct target. And one of the things that helps me with not having that target is the fact that the wife and I are both journalists. So in our thing, when we have the regular full-time day job, our pay is so fucking low that the bar is set at this point that like corporate gig would be incredible, but like when you're just like, I'm covering like regional journalism, or she covers like feminist pop culture and politics, it's like this bar is as low as it can go for people of our age group, and perhaps even too low. So failure would take such a different form. Like success for us is just like, we're paying the rent and we feel good about what we're doing every day, and that is my target. I think in my 20s, it's probably more like what you were talking about, where it's like, I need to be a superstar and I need to have so much money that I can do these things. And now it's just like, sustainability is nice. I have so few friends that could even pull that off. So like, let's just do that.
It is a tough market, I think. You said something earlier that I found interesting. Like, you said you moved from LA back to the Kansas, Missouri, to make things better instead of what you didn't do in LA. Like, where did it come from? Like, what do you mean? Is it like charity based, or just making the world a better place? That's kind of what I took from that, but I'm not sure if I got that right.
My wife likes to put it that, everyone's like, call your senator and tell them to vote this way on this thing. And in California, we'd reached the point that, like, calling our senator would be like, hey, vote this way. And they were like, yeah, that's what I was going to do. Duh. I'm originally from Central Kansas. Kansas City is a cool, up-and-coming, next Austin level place that is right on the border between Kansas and Missouri. And, like, currently there are 3 women's healthcare clinics in all of Missouri that might drop down to 1 because of Republicans that were voted in. And Kansas has similar issues, and it's all over the board. So we were like, let's go somewhere where our votes matter and we can help with things. So we just did the midterm elections, and we both volunteered on campaigns, did a lot of like phone banking and knocking door to door and like covering stuff. And the people we were supporting overwhelmingly seemed to win, which was a nice, cool thing. It's like, oh, we're making change, as opposed to like living in a place where it's like, I can do a lot of Facebook posts, but like nothing's really changing. So it's nice to be in a place where you can, talk to people, and maybe no one's ever talked to them like they're a real human being before, or engages them on their terms, and you're like, here's some stuff, and like maybe you've been misled, and they're like, oh, my mind has changed, and you're like, this is not how things work anywhere else.
Like this sounds probably like an obvious question, but like the why, because the why is because you help people do better, make the world better. But why you? Why is it such a driving force for you? Because it's a pretty big thing, like a big change to leave things behind, and get involved at that level.
There's like this thing that goes around a lot, where it's like the Silver Lake neighborhood that we lived in Los Angeles, which is not a big neighborhood. It's very small within LA sort of things. If everyone in Silver Lake moved to Wyoming, Wyoming would shift to a Democratic state. And that's how very little it would take to shift some of the states around the country and to get big things changed. And so there's been for years people being like, if we want anything to change, young people need to leave the big cities and go elsewhere, and that's the only way stuff changes. Young people aren't going to leave the big cities, but we were like, what if we did? And we did, and it's been very rewarding. And like on top of everything else, like I am currently in a 2-story house that costs less than the 1-bedroom apartment I shared with my wife and a cat in Los Angeles. And so getting to just stretch my arms out feels like, okay, like I got a lot of things here. And honestly, the way that the world works in 2018 makes it so that like I feel like I'm missing nothing. Like my big concern was like, I'm leaving Los Angeles. I don't think I'm going to get to see all the bands I like. All the bands I like come through here. And also, I work a job out of Los Angeles right now, and I just sort of like video chat in the mornings, and that's all good. I was like, okay, so like no one needs to live in the cities anymore. There's a chance to do these things.
Well, that's interesting that you are that involved, and that you have that calling. I always wonder, like I live in Canada. I'm an immigrant. I can't even vote here, and I'm in Ontario, and we have our little Trump light at the wheel right now. With the Ford brothers, who seem to be successful all the time. I don't know why.
I don't know either.
Yeah, I don't know how that works, man. I'm impressed that you even understand what I'm talking about when I'm talking about Ontario politics. But
we pay attention to who's next door, I assure you.
Yeah, I guess. Well, for me, it always makes me laugh when I get upset about American politics. Like a couple of months ago, I was up, I think it was 2 a.m. in the morning, to follow the results of a Senate seat in a state I didn't even know where it was on the map. And I'm like, okay, here's this Dutch guy living in Canada following the Senate election in the US. Just because it's such a shit show nowadays, it feels like you have to pay attention. Like if everybody, like even here up north of the wall, like I've never had this in my life. Like I'm still a fresh baby. I'm like not even 40 yet, but I don't remember a time where it was so important to pay attention. But maybe I will.
Well, there used to be a sense of like, no matter what happens, things are still going to be okay and functional. And we've entered into a place where that's not true. And it is the big shift over the last 6-8 years is that all local politics on down to like the very local politics in America have become national politics, because who wins in a small contest in some goddamn like Missouri county winds up affecting whether or not the president can be implicated for crimes and go to jail, or like whether or not it's so goddamn out of control. We wake up with things where it's like, I don't know, tomorrow he's going to say that trans people are illegal, and you're like, who stops that? And sometimes it because of archaic systems, it's like, I don't know, it falls to the mayor of a state or some judge in Texas, which is the thing that's happening right now. A judge from Texas is weighing in on stuff. And so I understand being in another country, because I have other friends that are doing this, where they're like, it's not just you. we have to know too, because that changes like how the rest of the world works. And you're like, okay, so it falls down to a lot of these very simple exchanges, and sometimes exchanges that are elections that have a difference of a couple of hundred people. And you're just like, wow, how did everything become so hyper specific? And so I get why you have to do it.
It's like you with a background in comedy. Any other time that I can remember, there was always this good relationship between politics and comedy. Like it kind of coexisted. And then there was a shift. Like it started.
We had
with,
Michelle
like,
Wolf, and then nothing after that.
After that, yeah, well, that's like that thing. But I remember during the Trump campaign where the comedians still thought that they could joke it away, and make it not matter, and then it didn't matter because he won anyway. And I think after that, it kind of changed. Like I remember the John Oliver's make Trump Drumpf again or whatever, and he had such a mic drop moment saying like, okay, we got him, it's over,
right? And
then nothing. Like, how do you watch this happen as a comedian? Do you understand it? Like, does it feel different?
Of course, it feels different, and that one's also one of those things that like the Drumpf mic drop moment is something that like I have friends that write on that show, and a thing that they had to like after he became president that they had to sit down like and interpersonally like think about was like, oh hey, we went to like 11 on so many like non-issues. Now based on the scope of things that it's like when we tried to go to 11 on something like this, like you can't vote for this fucking criminal. No one could tell the difference because it sounded like what loud was for us at all times. And they're like, okay. And I see it in the show right now because like a lot of their like pieces that are outraged about something feels like it's turned up to a 6. And I'm like, cool. So you understand where that is. But also a thing that, a couple of biographers of Trump and writers about this thing have mentioned is that it was actually stand-up comedy that got us into this situation because at the White House Correspondents' Dinner in 2015, Obama had a couple of jokes that he said to Trump while he was in the room that were about him and the like goddamn birth certificate thing and about him being a lunatic, and it ended with a joke about him like, hey, why don't you go investigate whether or not the moon landing was real or not? And you can see it in the footage. Like, he just goes this, like, crazy stone face. And a lot of people have said that, like, he's said to them, like, that was the moment that people had been exploring for 2 decades, Trump running. Different, like, grifters. They're like, you should run. And he's like, no. But a lot of people, like, that's the moment that there was just the snap in him. It was like, I'm going to run and I'm going to undo everything that Barack Obama ever did. It's like, is it over a couple of jokes that you couldn't take? Oh my God. So like there is Patton Oswalt had a bit back when Bush the younger got elected that was about people being like, hey, isn't it cool for you as a stand-up comedian that like it's 2000 and like Bush is president and he's so dumb, aren't the jokes so easy? And he's like, I would rather be raped by demons that fly out of like God's asshole every morning, and like it's a really dark bit, but it's all about like, no, as comedians, this isn't great for us, and we would rather not live in this world where this guy is president. This is that times like 100, because even in the stand-up world, if you try to do a joke about Trump in the last couple of years, all that you're going to do to a room is make everybody just shut down, because everyone like, you bring up his name and then everyone remembers like, oh yeah, he runs the country and everything here is going really badly for a lot of people, including probably me. And then they don't hear anything else that you're saying. So even if you have like a really, really good Trump joke, it's like, don't bother. Please don't say it. Like all you're going to do is bum everybody out.
It's true. I struggle with it sometimes because dunking is so easy every now and then.
Yes.
I don't think it's helping at all.
No.
Like, you get just a shit day on Twitter with a bunch of randos in your menchies. And and he's no one's gonna care about what you add to the conversation. But it's weird times, man. I
think I respond to like every fourth or fifth tweet that he puts up, and then always within like 10 minutes I delete it because I'm like, he's not reading it.
No,
it's not making my life any better that anybody else sees it, and all I'm gonna get is just like a bunch of like weird people that have like flags in their Twitter names telling me that like I'm a child that should be drowned in a detention camp somewhere, and I'm just like, I don't get what this is.
Yeah.
So even knowing it, I can't stop doing it, which is perhaps the addiction of Twitter, which sucks.
Yeah. Yeah, I have that problem. Absolutely. It's like usually I talk about all kinds of lighthearted stuff, and on the show
we've not done a great version of this show.
No, but it's good. Sometimes you need to have the conversation, and you're a perfect person to have that conversation with. Do you think the lack of empathy that we see online is going to be a long-term problem? Because I worry about that sometimes, where when I see comments, like, people just cannot relate to another person anymore. And I'm not sure if that's an online thing or that it's just something. I hope it's all the youth, that's on Twitter and haven't really clicked into it yet, but it's not. It's like my age kind of people who still do that. And I bring this up because we talked about the gaming culture before, because that's kind of why I operate in it. So that bubble is there. It's very prevalent there, like the lack of empathy. But now it has shifted to the political scene. It probably was always there. It's just more highlighted right now. And then all of a sudden you see the magnitude of that problem, of the online complete lack of empathy. Do you think it's an online thing, or is that just a shift we made a while ago?
It is. Yeah, it freaks me out too, and but it is. We're old enough, and we've done this stuff long enough that we saw it early, and it is a lot like bringing up the old Gamergate thing again. That people like you and I, from an age group and this interest, were canaries in a coal mine, and we got to see a lot of things, and it is something that like I can never get my head around it, because people in the regular press right now will be like, who could have ever foreseen this sort of weird violence coming? And those of us that were on like 2014 were like, hello, we tried to tell you and you didn't give a shit about it back then. It is a weird confluence of a cultural shift. It is a weird confluence of technology. It's always one of those things that I'm like, hey, what would have happened if just in the last decade and a half, no one got to have anonymous usernames? Everyone had to sign their name to whatever they were doing. That's not coming around again anytime soon. And it allows people to be like this, which is why I always love one of those pieces where somebody's like, hey, I just found out that my husband posts on 4chan, and he's made up a universe where like I cheat on him, but also like he's a Republican operative and stuff. And you're just like, yeah, it's just all like fantasy world stuff. There is a grossness and a disconnect, and it is very funny to me that you brought it up, actually, because this week was the first time in like maybe 2 years that I can remember seeing somebody on Twitter post like screenshots of like an Xbox like gamer conversation where like a dude was just being a huge piece of shit to a girl that he'd been in like a Call of Duty match with. And I was like, I feel like in 2014, 2013, that was basically all I read on Twitter. But now I don't see that, because it has moved into a mainstream. And not even into just like a regular mainstream of like some other outlet or some other comment section. Like, that is literally how there is a vaping Steam playing congressman right now who talks that way to women. And it's like, that guy will go on the record. He has a PR person that can't like not say those things, and no one's being like, that guy can't be in office. Like it's we have come so far, and so I guess the bigger question is like, when does that tide turn back? Because it feels like we've gone 1,000% into the darkness already. There's like no further to go. There is no. The world could not be harassier right now. There's no other place there's no way that things can get genuinely worse.
Yeah.
Like we're already in a place where doxing and bomb threats and swatting and like everything else that's there, and like every person on every social media platform can be threatened and attacked. There's nothing on top of this. You can't just like reach through a phone and punch somebody in the face. So here we are. So it would be amazing. Yeah. I would pay so much for that app. Especially if I could just like leapfrog it into other friends like dating apps. Like when somebody's like, how dare you reject me? I'm like, send them my fist, but like through your Tinder. Like that would be incredible.
That'd be fantastic.
No, it's weird. We've reached an end point, and that's kind of exciting in its own way because there's no further escalation that can happen beyond the escalation of where we already are. Where last week there were 150 bomb threats sent to places around the United States, which hasn't been really reported on that much, including schools, including a school where a major mass shooting happened, and it's just like we're there. We're at a saturation point for how fucked everything can be. Yeah. So what do we do? So like people being dicks on Xbox Live is so far down on the thing, but it is, as we mentioned, canary in the coal mine. That's where this started. That's where this should go back to. Like our best version is like, can we put this back into a game space? Can I shove all of the fucking nightmare that is 2018 like just back into Xbox Live? Yeah, because that would be a better version of things.
That would be great. So there's two things. One, I picked one hell of an episode to wear a goofy hat on. Two, and here's where we're gonna tie this all back together, because we talked about like everything's terrible,
right?
And yet here we are, like people who create content, people who go out of their way to help people deal with it. Because every time you do a thing, every time you write an article, someone is just escaping it for a brief moment. Like, how important do you think is it, and for content creators, how do you find that motivation to still put good, or not even, well, I consider it good, but at least escapism into the world? Because I think that is getting more and more important, and I hope that there is an uptick in a little bit more positivity, positive content, because I think that's how we're gonna turn the tide in some spaces. And I always say, like, we need to find a way to monetize kindness a little bit better.
I like that,
because that's how it's gonna change. But where do you find the drive to pick up that pen when you do an article, and knowing that everything's on fire, and here we are talking about video games?
The real answer is I don't. Yeah. A lot of times, like, especially like I have a column at Unwinnable called Monster Closets, where I look at the history of survival horror games, and as my editor there can tell you, like, I have never been on time for a submission there ever, because sometimes I'm like, oh hey, this is like this weird fucking 1981 like game that like had a thing, and I find it interesting, and then in the middle of writing about that, it's like, hey, on the border today we like shot children or something like that, and I'm just like, okay, so the scale of life right now has obliterated stuff, and then it's just like I can't come back to it. So your other question is sort of my answer for it is a focus on positivity, and I forget who did sort of a bigger public take on this on Twitter like yesterday, but it is where I've been for a year, and I don't think I've talked to anybody about it. I've stopped writing bad reviews of things. Like if I did this years earlier with like films, where I was just like, oh, unless it has like something that like is so toxic that I'm like, I need to warn people, like, you need to avoid this because it will make your children like actively shit. Yeah. I won't write about it. And in games, like, you and I are again of like the same age. Did you happen to come up around like, was something awful important to you coming up?
Yes.
Yeah. So like I came up with a lot of like places like that, and a lot of like film sites that were similar, where like it was just so fun and cool to like shit on things.
Yeah.
And like even things that were good, it was like, oh, how funny it is that that like we're shitting on this thing. And that took years of my life to overcome, in terms of like, that's not always interesting. And also you can't go into every situation shitting on everything, including when things are good. So I've tried to do a lot more of like, hey, if there's something I like about this thing, I will go everywhere and write and talk about like what a cool, good thing it is. If it's a nothing thing, it either sits, or if at worst it's something that I think is bad, then I'm like, all right, I'll leave it alone. With the only exceptions being like things that like the game Vampire came out this year, which I fucking adore. I love that game. It's so broken. And my review of it was like, oh my God, I love it. And I can't remember the last time that I got like a review game that like I got done with like a 20-hour playthrough, and the very first thing I did was like fire it up again to try like a different path and do stuff. Like I cannot remember that happening. I was like, that's how much I love it. I really like it. It is not a good game. It is a lot of interesting ideas thrown at the wall. And I was like, I want to write about this because I want to put out into the world my ideas on how you fix it for the next one or something. And I was like, but that is also positivity. That is believing in something, loving it enough to be like, I would like to see where this goes. I would like there to be more of this. Like, I absolutely want multiple sequels to that. I really want it to continue. I'm not a source of negativity. So that happens, and then all of this, everything that we've talked about thus far, is in weird mirror worlds to what happens in the actual politics of games, where you find bad political games, which earlier in the show you asked me to talk about the things that I do and what I make. One of the big things I have coming up is that I have a book for Boss Fight Books coming out that's about Postal, the video game.
Oh, yeah.
There's one. Yes. And I'm co-writing it with my writing hero, and he is writing about like the movie stuff, and I'm writing about the game stuff, and we sort of agreed to do that. I had never played Postal before, and so I started playing it for this, and I fucking hate it. I hate everything that it is and everything it stands for, and I went out to interview the creators, and I found them to be not great people in general, as you might expect. And so I have a million words to say about it, and there's all that, but also like it has been impossible for me to finish the book because stuff that happened in 1996, 1997 around this book, including like people being called to the White House to being asked if they were responsible for, Columbine because they made a video game. Those same people have been called by the Trump administration to the White House to be blamed for games, for shootings instead of like guns. And I'm like, well, everything old is new again. And like, we're still in this place, and like, what goddamn cycle are we in that this happens? So it has been my hell, and I just want the book to come out to be done with it. But it is that same sort of thing where it's like, I have no positivity to say about this, and I have nothing from it except for an awareness of like, what do we do as a community or as a space? Like the worst part of the book is that 15 years after the release of Postal 2, they did a DLC game in the middle of Gamergate where like Milo is somebody that's there, and I was just like, I don't want to write Milo into my book. I want him to be like a footnote, but also the big bad of that DLC is Tim Schafer. And I reached out to Tim Schafer and was like, hey, did you ever play this? And he's like, no. And then he like looked it up on YouTube and got really fucking bummed about it and like wrote back to me. I was like, oh, I feel really bad that I saw all the shitty things that they had to say about me. I was like, cool. So like the best thing that I had to do here was to like call up one of my heroes and really fucking bum him out.
Fuck his day up,
yeah. Oh, I made Tim Schafer see what the Postal guys had to say about him a few years later. Like, cool on me. So like, toxicity spreads. A lack of positivity is such a nightmare thing, and so trying to find the places where it can come from is so cool and important because we need that.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's important to uplift the voices that do have that positivity, because, like you said, like something
Yes.
awful. I used to I used to be such an edgelord, Brock. It was terrible. I'm so glad I grew out of that. But like cinema sins,
We
I used
we
to
all
love
were.
it,
It's fine.
and
Yeah.
now I look at it and I'm like, I can't fucking stand it. Like now I adore movies with Mikey. It is such a fantastic show and a fantastic human being.
Yeah.
And then I look back at what I used to like, and it's like terrible. But when you compare how much money the assholes still make and how much money the good guys make, we're not there yet. So I'd like it when I see someone like you who has quite a range and has quite some influence. I often see you signal boost like some of the people that might not have gotten the reach that they
Oh, good.
they gotten without people like yourself, and I appreciate it, and that's really I really mean it when I say like we need to monetize kindness a little better, even if you don't mean it. If you put positivity in the world and bank on it, that is a better alternative than what we've had for the last couple of years. Like unless you use that money to do terrible things, I guess, but like there has to be a better way, because from the other side, all these people that put shit in the world because it's profitable, they might not all be terrible people. It might be, oh, it's just a thing, it's just a skit that I do,
Right.
but you're still putting it out there. So yeah, make some money being not an asshole would be fantastic. Yeah, so it's our job, I guess, to keep doing that. But it's hard, man.
I appreciate you saying that. Like, I did an interview a month ago where somebody reached out and they're like, "Hey, do you delete tweets?" And I was like, "Do what now?" And they're like, "You're a comedian that's been on Twitter since 2010. You have less than 10,000 tweets. I can't imagine that you do that without a thing." And I was like, "Oh, actually, yes. Like 2 months earlier, I finally bought a service to delete tweets because of what happened around James Gunn, because James Gunn made James Gunn movies for a decade and a half, and then like randomly, like you could drag up one thing and get him fired." And I was like, I don't think that I have anything I've ever tweeted that I wouldn't sign my name to, like in like blood. But like I was like, it doesn't all need to be there. So I got a service that like anything over than 365 days, it's just gone. And as part of this interview, I was like, the only thing that I regret, it's not like losing like years of my dumb goddamn dad jokes and puns, or like here's my clever thought on a movie. It was mostly like signal boosting. It was like I've always tried to be very good about like, I don't know, I'm a cis white guy that has the lowest level of celebrity I think anyone can have, and overwhelmingly I just love cool indie games and comics and stuff from mostly non-cis white dudes, and I just want those to be exposed to other people, and it's always gone very well. And so I was like, the things that I lost weren't my dumb shit, it was other people's like cool stuff. And I was like, I wish there was a version of it where all of my stuff could just go away and it could just keep like, here's this person's Kickstarter and here's this person's like website or webcomic or something. Like I appreciate that this is the first time anybody's ever told me that they do see that like I do a lot of signal boosting. That makes me feel good, but no, that's all that's out there.
It is important. I have seen at least 2 instances, and including one of myself, where your retweet was the start of a viral tweet. I've seen you do it for Kyle Gatto about his weird tweet that got like blew up. And you were one of mine as well on one of it. I think was a picture of my cat when he turned off my PlayStation. That went nuts. It's funny how it works. Like, oh god, I could get lost in the weeds and start talking about how Twitter algorithm works. But let's save that for another time. But
sure,
it's good, Brock. I think you're a fantastic guy, and seeing how
thank you,
how willing you are to put yourself out there, because it's not always easy. Like you said, you had the worst of the worst movement come at you right out of the gate, and to still be there and to not give a shit, just to do the right thing. I really, really admire that.
It was a trial run for what all of life is right now. Like a few years ago, it felt like a badge of honor. Like, ooh, there's that. And now, like, if you're anyone that has anything that more than 100 people see on Twitter, of course, the exact same jackholes are going to do the same stuff. Like, it's not special anymore.
It's too bad. But I need to believe that we are on an upswing. I think, yes, the pendulum is swinging, but I think it's always gonna swing harder back. We just have to make sure it doesn't swing the other way again, because it's 8 years, 4 years. I don't know what we're gonna get, but I feel there is something happening that we're going through the worst of it. And you know what? Say when you're going through hell, keep walking, because
right.
You have to make it out on the other side. This has been interesting. This is a show that did not go how usual it goes, but that's great. I kind of enjoyed it. Like I said, it's just like if you're listening to this, I'm wearing a Christmas Santa hat, and we're talking about how the world's going to shit. But that's my brand. So no, that's great. I always end on podcast and shill, where I give my guests the opportunity to promote whatever they want and all that kind of stuff. First of all, where can we find you, Brock?
I am on Twitter at Brock Wilbur, on Instagram at Brock Wilbur, at brockwilbur.com, and brockwilbur.net, and brockwilbur.com.
I think we can find you as Brock Wilbur. That's good to know.
Yeah, you could probably Google it. It'll turn up.
I so Googled you. You won't believe it. Is there anything coming up, or anything you want to highlight that we should look out for, that I can link in the description?
Oh, I have a couple of really fun podcasts. I have too many fun podcasts. You can find them all on iTunes by searching my name, but a couple in the rundown. The Coolest Kids is a podcast I do with my friend, the Black Nerd, about emo bands. I have a show called Carrying Into the Void, which is about sort of like Lovecraftian self-care that people seem to really enjoy. I have a show with my wife about people moving out to the Midwest to do cool political stuff called Missouri Loves Company. I have one about Silent Hill called Less Than Silent Hills with my friend Rachel, where we're sort of plowing through the Silent Hill series so that people don't have to play the games. She's a comic out of Boston, and we're not great at Silent Hill, but we're helping move it along. A show X-Winging It with Alex J. Kane. He has a boss fight book coming out about Knights of the Republic. Mm-hmm. He works at StarWars.com, and I grew up playing the Star Wars games without having seen the movies, so that's all of my Star Wars lore. Yeah. And so it's all been erased in the reboot, but it was like, oh, we should go back and play a bunch of these games and bring out the stuff that's worth it. So we have 2 episodes so far. One is Shadows of the Empire, and the other one's Dark Forces, and that's a pretty good ass one. And I have one called Adapt Table, which is a brand new one that's launching this week. Me and a friend, I'm a video game writer, he's a movie critic, and we're doing a show about the board game adaptations of video games and TV shows, because we're just like, why? So our first episode is about the Fallout board game adaptation, which is wildly good, but I think from here we're going to find a bunch of bad stuff.
That is interesting. I still don't understand what the Dark Souls board game is, so I might...
Right?
Yeah.
And my favorite one, I just got it yesterday. I bought it, and I can't wait to see it. Somebody made a board game out of This War of Mine, which if you're listening and you don't know, is an indie video game about the Bosnia conflict and children dying, and it's bleak as shit. Yeah. I was just like, what is the board game of this? Yeah. Who played that small indie game and was like, yeah. You know Cardboard. What needs to be here? Dice. Yeah.
That's good.
More people in a fun party situation.
Yeah, that is fantastic. Well, that's we got a lot to look forward to. That's for sure. I'm gonna use my shield. Give a shout out to one of my patrons, Hunter Pearson. He's been a great supporter right from the start, and he sent me an email this week saying that he was gonna go off Twitter because it was just not good for him anymore. And I kind of respect that. If it's no longer fun for you. And you don't have to use it like me, where you feel like you have to use it to stay relevant every single day with desperate tweets of with reek of bad comedy. But he's been such a great guy. Just a heads up to him. Thank you so much for all your support. And I know he's still going to listen.
Congrats to you, person that no longer exists.
Yeah, on the Twitterverse. And
which also, you and I can leave tomorrow too. Like, I know it doesn't feel that way, but we can. And
I know.
The number of times my wife has had the conversation with me, I'm sure your wife has had that with you too. It's just like, you needn't. It's fine.
Yeah.
You can just go make your thing, and we could just go do it. We could be free. We won't. We choose not to.
It usually starts with, "Can you put your phone down?" That's what starts the conversation often for me, which I do because I'm a great husband. Anyways, I am the Hashtagonist, and you can find me at the Hashtagonist on Twitter or Patreon or all those channels. I even got my YouTube name now, so that's great. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Brock, for coming on the show. This was a very interesting episode for me, and it was fun to get to know you a little better. This was nice. Yeah, we dick around on Twitter a bunch of times, but it doesn't beat a conversation like this. Maybe one day we'll run into each other.
I'm sorry that we didn't do a very good video game episode.
No, it's okay.
I can come back and do that.
I'm not married to the whole video game theme for the podcast because there's so many stuff to talk about. I'm more of finding interesting people. And man, you're an interesting person.
You have such great interviews, and overwhelmingly they get there where they're like, this is how this video game was emotional and important to me. Yeah. And instead, I was just like, you know what? That Donald Trump guy, I don't think I like him that much.
Hey man, my first episode was with Marcus Beer, and he went on like a 10-minute rant on gun control. So that basically set the theme. But like we said, it doesn't always have to be video games. It's also the people behind it that make them, that make this industry work. And Brock, you're definitely one of them. So I will not keep you any longer. And if you're still listening, thank you for tuning in. We'll be back again next week with Tara Bruno, PR queen of the East Coast. So we'll have an interesting conversation again. Brock, good night, and we'll talk soon.
Good night.